Hello everyone, my name is Allison. I am a knitter based in Nebraska, and I've got a lot to show you today. So it has been a little bit since my last episode. I have since gone to go visit family. I have traveled to not quite a few. I went to 2 different yarn stores, but I will tell you all about them, show you all of the things that I have acquired in the meantime. But I wanted to start first with finished objects, which again, there's quite a few. I have just been knitting up a storm lately. So if you watched my last episode, which I always have linked in the description down below, you can just click on that if you haven't seen it. But if you saw my last episode, you will have seen this shawl before. But I did do a little bit of tinkering. I changed how the very ending and bind off of this shawl works because I have knit another larger size. And last episode, I don't think I had the name yet. So this is the Cedarwood shawl. My first version is the size small. This one I knit in Purl Soho's Season Alpaca yarn, which is slightly different to the second version. I'm calling this pattern a DK weight yarn. I believe Purl Soho Season Alpaca is technically a sport weight, but it's it kind of works up as a DK weight. Like I said, I have changed how the bottom of the shawl works so that they are both the same for the smaller version and the larger version. Basically, all I changed from what you saw last time is I had ended this with 2 rows of garter stitch, but I ripped that out and changed it to an I-cord bind off, which I just love how an I-cord bind off looks. They are slightly tedious. They take a long time to knit, or at least it does for me to knit an I-cord bind off, because you're basically knitting each stitch 3 times. But man, I really do think it's worth it to have just like such a nice finished edge. And I took my like product pictures for these shawls, this shawl pattern, while I was visiting family up in Michigan. I will put the pictures up on the screen, but we were near Sleeping Bear Dunes, which was just gorgeous. But because I was on like quite a time crunch for like the only possible day that we had to go up to Sleeping Bear, I did both of these I-cord bind offs within 24 hours, which is like something close to like 800 stitches of I-cord bind off. It was quite a lot. But I did manage to get it done so that we could get some awesome pictures. We got up there like super early in the morning, so there was no one on the beach, and it was just stunning. Not the scenery I typically get in Nebraska for my photos, but it was definitely worth the effort to try to finish this large size shawl in time. Hey buddy, you joining us? Maybe? So I did talk quite a bit about this in the last episode, but kind of a recap and other information. This shawl, the Cedarwood shawl, I'm going to be releasing in either late August or very early September. The date is still TBD, but if you follow me on Instagram, which I will have linked above or below, I will have all of that information like put out as we're getting a lot closer to the date of. For this smaller version, I knit this in Purl Soho Season Alpaca, which is a slightly lighter weight version of yarn than I call for in the pattern, but it does get to gauge for me. I used 2 skeins of the gray, which I believe is called Heather Gray, and then 1 skein of the purple, which is called Fresh Fig. Ooh, and it is too warm in July to be wearing this at the moment. And like I said last time, I wanted to have another larger version for those who want like a really big, warm, snuggly wrap-up shawl. So this is knit in Madeline Tosh DK yarn, and the green color is called Cactus, and the white color is called Horn. So for this, I used 2 skeins of the green and then 2 skeins of the white. And like I said, this is the larger version, as you can see. I know you won't be able to like see all of this on as I'm sitting down, but I will put the pictures up that we took up in Michigan those are a lot nicer looking than me just sitting here on the couch to chat with you. It's funny because I haven't been much of a shawl knitter in the last few years that I've been knitting like quite regularly, but I am just like full to the brim with shawl ideas at the moment. I think I might do one last version of this shawl, but in a smaller like bandana cowl style. So where it still has the triangle effect, but it's smaller and it's seamed up the back to create a cowl, kind of like the Andrea Mowry shift cowl. And there's a few other cowls that have that same kind of shape where it's like a tube, but then it also has the triangle down the front so that you get the big like 2012 triangle scarf look, which is actually, I was looking to see the last time that like fashion scarves were in. I looked through to see if I had any pictures of me wearing like a big triangle scarf, and I can't find any. I have some like big giant infinity scarves, and I have like long skinny scarves, all of these for when I was in like high school and early college. And I feel like there's something in the air that like fashion scarves are coming back in. I've been watching this season of The Bachelorette and the men are wearing fashion scarves. So it's definitely coming back in style. And if you don't know what I mean by fashion scarves, I'm talking about a scarf that is like purely decorative, not for warmth. So I have, like I said, I was scrolling through my old Facebook photos, which is something to do. But I was looking through my old Facebook photos of like when I was in high school, and like there are some pictures of me wearing like a big bulky scarf during the winter with a big winter coat, but there's a lot of pictures of me with one very specific yellow skinny scarf wearing like short sleeves. I wore it during the summers. It is not for warmth, but for the look. Regardless, I'm feeling very shawly at the moment. And like I said, this shawl pattern will be out late August, early September. I'll let you know when I have the exact date down. It is in testing right now. Some of the colors that my testers are using is just like, I went for very like cozy autumnal colors because that's when I'm gonna wear a shawl the most often anyway. And some of my testers are doing really bright colors, which looks so cool. Some of them are doing very summery colors. I have people using lots of different types of yarn. So if somebody's using a cotton yarn, I'm really interested to see how it looks in, you know, a more summery kind of style. But I'm just really happy with this shawl. I'm like so glad with how it turned out. I'm really happy that I like tinkered with the color work. I showed my original version last time, but I just think it's exactly how I pictured it in my head. So I'm really glad to have this pattern written up. I am excited to share it with you all and see the other versions that people come up with. It's just very exciting to see people knit the patterns that I create. So I do have another finished object to share with you that I finished actually quite some time ago now, but I wasn't allowed to talk about it, but I am now. I did a version of my Sideline shawl as a shop sample for the Bloom & Spindle in Chicago. I'm going to try to get this episode up like as soon as possible, but I collaborated with the Bloom & Spindle in Chicago for the Chicago Yarn Crawl. So it's July 22nd through the 30th is the Chicago Yarn Crawl. There's a ton of different local yarn stores that are all participating, which I will like link all of that information down below. If you're in the greater Chicagoland area and you're into yarn, you probably know about it already. But the Bloom & Spindle is like a brand new store. It only opened in, I think, April. And I worked with the store owner, Robin, who is so sweet, to use my Sideline shawl as the free yarn pattern or free shawl pattern for the yarn crawl. So the deal is that if you go to the Bloom & Spindle from the 22nd through the 30th, and buy the yarn to make the shawl, then you get the shawl pattern for free. They also have a free crochet pattern, and that's how it is for all of the stores that are participating in the crawl. There is some pattern there that is available for free if you buy the yarn to make it. So I quickly whipped up a version for the store that is just like the half and half version with their in-store fiber artist, their in-store dyer, which is Gnome Depot Fibers in the shade, in the colorway Water Lilies, which is the green and pink kind of slightly variegated, not like super intense variegated yarn. And then the pink is a Malabrigo sock yarn. I think that they look so beautiful together, and it kind of ties in the colors of the shop. The whole like aesthetic of the shop is kind of like a French patisserie. It is such a colorful shop. They have so many samples for only being open for a couple of months, and if you're in the area, I highly recommend you check it out. So next in my finished objects is my unnamed self-drafted cable knit raglan. So I definitely showed the beginning of this in my last episode. This pattern, it just flew off the needles. I was so into it. I think the cables are just so motivating because they're just like every couple of rows you're doing something slightly different, and it really like keeps you engaged in the whole process. So I knit this up in Harrisville Designs Daylight yarn in the blue colorway. And this took, I think, exactly 4 skeins, like more or less exactly 4 skeins. Or was it 5? Oh no. I'm gonna have to double check my notes. I will put it on the screen if it was 4 skeins or 5 skeins, but I had like exactly like, you know, this much yarn left of the last skein. And I will put a video of me wearing this on the screen because it is far too warm to just pop it on right now. So like I said, this pattern is completely self-drafted. I didn't use like the math or anything from any other pattern, and I made up the cable pattern for the front, and the sleeves just have a little stripe of half fisherman's rib going down the sides, which I think is, it's like slightly sporty, but I like the vibe. I think it's cute. I ended up going for a like fold over collar for it, and it's pretty like standard size, I guess. Like I knit it slightly longer than I would normally. The sleeves are also slightly longer than I would knit if I was trying to conserve on yarn. So if I'm being honest, I do knit quite a few cropped sweaters because I do get a little bit bored while I'm knitting the body, but I wanted this to be like my perfect fall winter pullover, and I do think I've achieved that. I'm really pleased with how it turned out, especially after blocking. I did a little like Instagram reel on the before and after of blocking, which I can have play on the screen, but it just looks, it's just exactly what I wanted it to be. I was really just envisioning a raglan sweater, a center panel of cables, not a ton of texture in the rest of the body of the sweater. Like there's a lot of cable knit raglan sweaters that I was looking at where they had like moss stitch or ribbing or something else going on the sides that I just didn't want to do. I wanted the like front cable pattern to really stand out. And I just had this like vision in my mind of having like basically racing stripes down the sleeves, which I added. And I'm really excited to wear this fall and winter. I think it's gonna look really cute with like a collared shirt underneath it. I think it'll look really nice with like, you know, jeans or like blue slacks, you know what I mean? Like not like work pants, but if I was going into the office, which my office is in my basement because I work remote, but if I were going into the office, I would definitely wear this with like, you know, kind of cool but not cool work pants, you know what I'm talking about? So for this pattern, I did something that I have done previously on the vest that I knit my dad last Christmas, which was called the office vest actually. I basically didn't want to bother with their very uneven ribbing that was called for in the pattern, and instead I just did 2x2 ribbing. On this I did 1x1. But to kind of ease the transition, or to give like a very on purpose stopping point between the pattern on the sleeves and the body and the ribbing, I did 1 row of purling, which I think looks really nice. Like, it gives it a very definite cuff, which I like the look of. I was really inspired for this pattern by, there's a pattern by Sari Norland, and I'm trying to remember what it's called. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it has like a really beautiful like center front cable pattern. I'll put the name for it up on the screen, as well as the Arctic Light pullover by Veronica Lundberg. Those like raglan cable sweater patterns is what was inspiring me for this. So I'm really torn about writing this up as an actual pattern. So please, like, let me know in the comments if it's something that you would be interested in. I know it's like slightly niche to have just like the center front cables and not cables everywhere. But if it's something that you're interested, please let me know. The reason why I'm really torn on releasing this as a pattern is because of the center front cable. So for me, if I'm going to be releasing any kind of knitting pattern, I want it to be as size inclusive as possible, which leaves a little bit of complication with this pattern specifically, because if I were to use the exact same cable pattern for all of the sizes, for like the much smaller sizes, the cable pattern, just because of the number of stitches, is going to take up more of the chest and like front and back, and it'll have less stockinette on the sides. And then for the larger sizes, the stitch count would be much more narrow on the front of the chest and back, and like tons of stockinette, which to me, I don't know the answer to this problem, and I genuinely really want to know people's thoughts on this in the comments down below. If you are knitting like an extra small or a like multi XL, what would you prefer? Like, would you prefer the same cable pattern for every size? It's like, I don't know, 7 to 8 inches across the front, chest, and the back? Or should I adjust the width of that cable pattern for different size groups? Like, I wouldn't do 12 different cable patterns so that each size has their own, but maybe for like, maybe 3, right? Maybe a slightly smaller, the medium size, and then a larger cable pattern with the rest of it being stockinette. I don't know like what the right call on that is, if you should have it the same for all of the sizes, or if you should adjust the like cable pattern for the different sizes. I understand that part of the reason a lot of cable patterns have like a filler cable or a filler stitch like moss stitch is to ease that transition for the different sizes so that it doesn't look disproportional depending on what size you're knitting. So I genuinely do want to hear what people think about that, especially if you knit, you know, much smaller, much larger sizes than I do. I knit this to have, I think, maybe 4 inches of positive ease, which would make this, I believe, a 42-inch sweater, but I could remeasure it to find out for sure. Just like holding this, I'm getting so warm. It is like, we are in the very end of July at this point. It's quite toasty. We are getting towards like 100 degrees most days, even though we had a really mild July, especially compared to last year. I only moved to Nebraska last year. Last year was our first summer here. We had an incredibly hot and dry summer last year. This July has been incredibly rainy and surprisingly cool, but we are now like back into regular July temperatures in like the upper 90s most days. So I'm getting a little bit toasty with all of this wool around me. But enough like design talk about this sweater. I do want to talk a little bit more about the yarn because I'm like so of two minds on this. I really like this yarn, and in general I think for most people it's a great sweater yarn. It's like exactly what you want in a woolly sweater yarn. But I know I have mentioned on this channel in the past that I have developed a lanolin sensitivity, which, not to get into like the nitty gritty details, it gives me a little bit of contact dermatitis, which is unpleasant to deal with, but workable. But I have been mostly avoiding like low process kind of wool since I figured this out, that I have a lanolin sensitivity. This would be an exception to the rule, or it is an exception to the rule, and it did trigger my lanolin sensitivity pre-wash. I'm really hoping that post-wash it's going to be completely fine, but I guess we will find that out this fall and winter because it is too warm to wear this sweater right now. But what I did do, and I know is slightly controversial, is I washed this in the washing machine because we have a hand wash setting and I've never had it felt anything yet. So even though this is a non-superwash wool, it's pretty low process, I just popped it into our washing machine on tap cold, hand wash setting. I used, I think like Woolite Delicate laundry soap with it to just kind of get it like a good wash. Like I really wanted to get as much like lanolin and other like spinning wool or spinning oil, all of that kind of stuff. It was a little bit of a smelly yarn as I was working with it, which is why I kind of thought that it might be not super compatible for my skin, and it ended up not being. But now that it's clean, it does not have that same, it does not, I mean, it doesn't really smell like anything at all. It doesn't have the like really strong spinning oil smell that it had to it before, and there was a fair amount of vegetable matter in this yarn that I picked out as I was going. I feel like I'm kind of like talking down on this yarn. I genuinely really like it. I think it is exactly what you want in like a good wool sweater yarn. It's something that feels like it's going to last forever. It feels like it's not gonna pill a whole lot. Now that it's washed, it's quite soft to the touch. Like I'm not worried about it being itchy, but in the pre-washed state, it was a little bit rustic. So that is something to keep in mind if that is something that you are also sensitive to. Okay, I'm done rattling on about things that you have already seen, or at least seen a little bit of. I have one more almost finished object, but I need to start this with a content warning for my mom specifically. This pattern is a gift. It is not for me, it is for a friend, but I knit a tiny little Anchors cardigan for a friend of mine who just had her first baby. It's so tiny. It's so cute. The only thing left I have to do on this is wash it and add some buttons. This project was, I mean, unbelievably quick. I mean, I knit this in a couple of days because it's so tiny. This is the 0 to 3 month size of the Anchors sweater, but I turned the Anchors sweater into a cardigan because essentially I wanted a somewhat low stakes chance to practice steeking. I have been thinking about making myself an Anchors cardigan in obviously my size for quite some time, and I knew that I didn't want to knit the actual Anchors cardigan pattern because it's knit for the body. The body's knit completely flat, or it's knit back and forth, and so is the Anchors cardigan for, you know, children's sizes. And I wanted to test basically just steeking it so that I can knit the entire thing in the round. It goes much faster. And it was definitely a learning process. I don't think that this is my finest work. It was my first attempt at steeking, and I don't think that it looks the best. I'm slightly disappointed in the overall finish of how I was able to achieve the steeks. And I think part of that is I didn't add enough stitches. So this is the first anything I've ever steeked, although I knew like the general gist of what you needed to do. So what I did was I added 5 extra stitches to the cast on, and then I just knit those as a stockinette panel through the whole thing. So you knit obviously in this rib stitch for the majority of the yoke, and then it's stockinette for the body, and then ribbing again for the hem. For that entire steek panel, I just knit it in stockinette, but I really wish I had more stitches. Because I only did 5 stitches, you cut up the center, which is 1 stitch, which left me with 2 stitches on either side, which was just, it was enough to work with. Like, I made it work, but it would have been better if I had given myself more stitches to finish it more nicely. Because I'm thinking the whole time I was finishing this, which was literally yesterday, I was thinking of like a literal, like a newborn baby is going to wear this, right? And I didn't want to add ribbon to it. Like, I didn't want that to be uncomfortable. I didn't want it to be like scratchy by his neck. And I don't know if I achieved like the nicest, most comfortable finish for a little newborn baby. Although I know so little about babies that I'm like, this seems enormous to me for a newborn. I guess I need to double check my gauge to see if I ended up with a larger size, but you know, worst case scenario, he grows into it. So I ended up knitting this in a cotton and acrylic blend. I'll put the name of the yarn on screen, and it used almost exactly 100 grams for all of this, including the finishing. And I did end up basically stitching down the steek with extra yarn. Obviously I added the button bands, but does use a little bit more yarn than this size calls for in the actual pattern of the pullover. And I knit it in this yarn for 2 reasons. Because first of all, it's very, very soft. It's super soft to the touch. It is machine washable and dryable. I'm not concerned that they won't be able to like actually use it. And my friend who this is going to lives in California and it's pretty warm, so I don't think that wool would necessarily be an appropriate choice for her newborn baby. But because I knit this in a cotton and acrylic yarn, I knew going into it that it wouldn't felt, obviously, and that is something that a lot of people keep in mind when doing a steek. Because cotton yarn isn't sticky, it's not gonna hold together like wool yarn will. And because of that, what I ended up doing was I sewed down with a sewing machine and reinforced the edge, basically so that the little bits of yarn can't wiggle their way out and unravel the sweater. But in doing that, which I knew that this was gonna happen, but in doing that, it like totally pulled the tension out of whack for the knitting. And I knew it, like I knew when I brought it to the sewing machine that it was going to do that, and it did. So what I ended up doing was I literally just rolled those 2 stitches that I had, I rolled those under and whip stitched it down to the inside of the cardigan. And it turned out fine, but there is quite a bit of bulk at the very top and the very bottom of each side of the button placket because of all of the like threads, like all of the yarn tails that it took to make the button placket. So that is my one thing that I'm like pretty not happy about, just because it's like right at the throat. That I just don't think is the nicest part of this sweater. But I definitely learned a lot about what I would do for myself for a cardigan, and it might not include steeking, or if it does include steeking, I would definitely want to make sure I'm using a wool yarn that can felt, and making the steek itself, like the steek panel, much wider, just so you have like the extra stitches to work with. So in the finishing, if I had twice as many stitches, I think it would have been a lot easier to secure it into place and make sure that it wasn't going to unravel, rather than my 2 stitches on each side, which it was really tight. It was quite finicky to finish it, and I'm not thrilled with the end result, which is quite disappointing, but it was certainly a learning experience. That is it for finished objects, and I only have one work in progress to share with you. So I'm going to talk about the Stephen West mystery sock knit along. So if that is something that you're working on and you haven't started yet, or you're only in the first clue or something, I'm only going to talk about clues 1 and 2, I think. It's a sock. I have gotten to the heel turn. So if that is something that you do not want to be spoiled on, I will put a time code on the screen of when I'm done talking about this, so that you can jump ahead. But if you are down to see what I have done so far for the sock pattern, ta-da! This is such an interesting sock pattern. I really don't know what to feel about it. I will finish the pair of socks, and I think it's going to end up going to my grandma. I want to talk about, I have a gripe with this pattern, and it's to do with the sizing. I was surprised by the sizing when I opened the pattern, because the smallest size was just a little bit smaller than the size I would normally knit, and the next size up was like dramatically larger than the size I would normally knit. So typically I knit a 64 stitch sock. This is a 60 stitch sock, and the next one was up in the 70s. And I knew that if I knit the next size up, they would be much too large. So I decided to go for the smallest size. And I guess I should have knit these on just larger needles, but the patterning of the sock makes it really hard to get up the foot. Before I get into it, let me talk about the yarn. So I went for a not over the top color combination. So I have a lilac and a navy. The lilac is, let's see. Okay, so the lilac is Cascade Yarn Heritage sock yarn in the color number 5705. And then the navy is Malabrigo sock yarn in the color Wales Road. So I think what I'm going to end up doing with this sock pattern is gift it to my grandma, because she has like the same size feet as I do, in that we wear like the same size shoe length, but she has very skinny little feet. So I think these will fit her better than they fit me. But the design of this sock makes it really tight. So there's cables in the top ribbing that makes it really difficult for me to get just over my ankle. Like that's the only spot that I really can't quite get it to fit. And then this like stair step kind of pattern is really clever. Like I really like the way that it was designed, but the stitches are stretched really quite far to make the stair step pattern. And you can see like it's just kind of, it's impacting how the yarn is like holding together. I'm really interested to see how it works post blocking, but as it is right now, I feel like these are quite decorative socks that would not be all that compatible to wearing and like getting a lot of wear in them. So this is actually the second mystery sock knit along that I've ever done. And I don't know, I don't think that mystery knit alongs are for me. I think I just prefer to know what the pattern looks like from the get-go, because this is not a pattern that I would pick out for myself. And now I kind of feel like I'm stuck knitting it, like I have to finish it because I started it, but it's not something that I'm like overly in love with how it looks. Although I'm definitely down for like a silly little sock. Like I have no issue with like a fun sock pattern, but the like kind of stair-step brick kind of patterning that we have going on here is not something that I would choose for myself. And I think part of the fun of a mystery knit along is doing it with other people, but I've been super busy in the last month and like just have not participated online in any, like I know that there's forums, I know people talk about it on Instagram. I just like truly have not had the time to like pay attention and participate. And so I'm just knitting a sock that I'm like not super in love with, so it's less fun than it would be if I were like knitting this in a group of people. I don't want to sit here and just like rag on this, but I think that it's a good learning experience for me. I'm going to finish the pattern. I think my grandma will like them either way because I knit them, and whether or not she wears them doesn't necessarily matter so much. But I do need to finish this sock. I have not done the other sock at all. I didn't even think about that. I didn't think about putting these into 2 balls so I can knit the left and right foot at the same time. Didn't think about that. So I guess I will finish the first sock and then I will knit the second sock and I will send them to my grandma and she will probably like them either way. So that was my only work in progress to share with you, but I do, ooh, sorry, Jackie. I do have a big old bag from Wool & Company to show you some acquisitions. So like I said, when we were visiting family, I was in the Chicagoland area. I made it to Wool & Company and to the Bloom and Spindle in Chicago, and I have some things to show you. I only picked up things at Wool & Company and then kind of exhausted my yarn budget while I was there, so I didn't grab anything at the Bloom and Spindle, but I do have a few things to show you. So we will start with yarn. So Wool & Company is not in Chicago. It is in the suburbs. It's in South Elgin, I believe. So it is a little bit of a drive if you were in Chicago in the city proper. Both my parents and my husband's parents live in the Chicago suburbs. So it was actually quite a drive. I think it was like an hour and a half one way for us to go to Wool & Company, but it was absolutely worth the drive. It is truly like a warehouse. It's really funny because I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. My mom has always been into various fiber arts, and Wool & Company has had many different locations over the years, which I have seen when I was like a little kid and didn't knit and was just kind of tagging along on my mom's errands. So I remember they used to have a shop in downtown St. Charles, if you've ever been there. And I feel like they used to have a shop in Batavia before that, but maybe that could be a different shop. Either way, I very specifically remember their shop in downtown St. Charles, and it was teensy tiny and it was overflowing with different yarn. And I just remember being like a kid and being like, you can't even like walk around because there was just so much yarn around. And now they're in South Elgin. They have this enormous space that has just like all of the yarn that you could possibly imagine. If you've ever shopped on their website, and I do shop, I shop them online pretty regularly because they have great prices. They have discounts on like buying multiple skeins of their like everyday favorites, I think is what they call it. And their shipping is either pretty affordable or free if you spend, I think, $100, which is quite easy to do. And their shipping is super fast. If you live in the Midwest, I highly recommend shopping online with Wool & Company. They have just about anything you could possibly think of. But just seeing the store in person, there's so much room. There's so many different yarns to look at. I mean, it took us, I think, a solid hour and a half just walking through and like looking at the different types of yarn, but I did pick up a couple of things. So I picked up the yarn that I'm using for my Stephen West Mystery Socks knit-along, and I picked up 3 other schemes while I was there. So this is Madeline Tosh. What are you called? Tosh Merino Light. So these are both the same Tosh Merino Light. It is a single ply fingering weight yarn, which I have never used before. I've never used a single ply yarn that is spun. So I've used unspun yarn before, but this yarn has a twist, but it's only 1 ply. I think this is definitely going to be a shawl between the 2 of these. I have a couple of ideas for new shawls, and I was really enamored with these colors. So the darker color is called Siren, and this is just like a beautiful, really dark between like a burgundy and an oxblood. There is a little bit of like an eggplanty purple mixed in. It's very much a tonal variegated yarn. Like, it is not one solid color, but the overall color is like dark reddish purple. And then the same for the lighter color. So this is called Coquette Dew, and it is a lighter pinky fuchsia red. So there's areas that are much lighter pink, there's areas that are quite red, and then there's areas that are like just plain old fuchsia. So I was looking at the 2 of these thinking, either I want to fade them or I will do some kind of color block situation. I just think these 2 colors together are so beautiful. The yardage is quite generous on this. It's 420 yards and 100 grams, which I would honestly say that's kind of like a light fingering, but it definitely looks like a regular fingering weight yarn. So I'm really excited to try these out. And then the other yarn I picked up is like neon bright Barbie pink. This is Hedgehog Fibers sock yarn, and the color is Sorry Not Sorry. So while we were at Wool & Company, I was just like shocked by how much Hedgehog Fibers that they have out in display. It's like the most Hedgehog Fibers I've ever seen ever, but also like all of the different varieties. So like the mohair, the super bulky, like the sock yarn, every Hedgehog Fibers that you could think of was represented. Like I feel like Hedgehog Fibers took up like a quarter of the store, and they have every brand you could possibly think of. They have like Isager, they have Madeline Tosh, they've got like Barocco, they've got brands that are harder to find in the US like Istex, they've got I'm trying to think of like the brands that like Petite Knit uses. They have like all of those. Basically any yarn you could possibly think of, they have. But all of the Hedgehog Fibers are so saturated in color. Like, they have so much bright colors. They have tons of speckles. They've got tons of variegated yarns. But I was like sucked in by this. It's almost like it like glows purple. It's so pink that it like reflects purple. It's the most interesting neon yarn I have ever seen. This is 400 meters, 100 grams, 90% wool, 10% nylon, superwash sock yarn. I'm very interested to see what I come up with for this yarn. It is definitely going to be a little bit of a showstopper. And yarn aside, I also picked up a book, and I was gifted a book for my birthday by my brother and my soon-to-be sister-in-law. So first, the book I picked up at Wool & Company is Knit This by Veronica Lindberg, who is Kutova Kika on Instagram and YouTube and everywhere. If you're watching this, you have probably seen or heard of her, but she has a great YouTube channel. She has a great Instagram. I have seen a lot of her content, and I thought that this was just a really beautiful book. The book itself is so nice. It has like nice thick paper. There's, I think, how many patterns is in this? 21 gorgeous everyday knit patterns. So I have been flipping through this quite a bit, and the patterns are very advanced beginner friendly. Like, they are not overly complicated. There's a couple of lace sweaters, I think 2, but for the most part I think the sweaters are quite approachable. So I have been looking through. I think the first pattern that I would knit is this honey cardigan. It is a half fisherman's rib, kind of bulky yarn sweater, but it's kind of a shrunken sweater fit, which is what I was looking for. I think that would be really beautiful, but there's tons of different patterns. I believe all of the patterns are also available individually on Ravelry, but I thought that this was just a really nice book to have. And then the other book that I received from my brother and his fiance is Visible Creative Mending for Knitwear by Flora Collingwood Norris. And I follow her on Instagram. I didn't actually know that she has a book out, and I think it is only available in the UK and Ireland, maybe. They picked this up when they were in Ireland on a trip recently, and she just does the most stunning visible mending you've ever seen. So like this is just like the inside cover, where she has done like duplicate stitch in a different color to match the pattern, or like this, she's done traditional like woven style mending, but done it in kind of a plaid way that just like, it's the most beautiful visible mending you've ever seen. So I'm really excited to get into this and learn a little bit more about actually mending things. I have a pair of socks that is in desperate need of some mending. So this is absolutely something I'm looking forward to getting into. Like, just look at this. It's the most stunning thing you've ever seen. It's like taking boring sweaters and making them interesting while fixing the holes in them. It's crazy. Or like on this one, she did duplicate stitch to fix the patch and then also embroidered little birds over it as well to look like a sunset and birds flying through this. It's just like very, very creative. Does exactly what it says on the front, visible creative mending. And now I find myself kind of whipless. I have my mystery knit along socks. I do have one clue I have not knit yet, which is like the gusset before we get into like the actual rest of the foot of the sock, but that won't take me all that long to do. So I don't have any other projects on the go at the moment. Besides, I think I have 3 different shawls that are all in timeout and I have no interest in touching, but I have been thinking about knitting the tessellated the tessellated vest by Andrea Mowry, and I was just looking through all of my stash yarn to see if I had anything to knit it with, and I came up with 3 different color combinations that I could conceivably knit this shawl with. I haven't knit any swatches, and all of my options are fingering weight, but the pattern is meant to be knit in sport weight, and I feel like it's so close I can probably make it work. So let me show you the color combinations that I have, and I'll tell you what I'm thinking. So I have this whole bucket full of different potential options, and I will try to resort them back to where they belong. So like I said, this pattern is meant to be knit in sport weight yarn. You need 3 different colors. You need one kind of plain, one that they have spin cycle yarn, so like a color changing yarn. I don't have any color changing yarns, but I'll have like basically a pop of color, and then one last yarn that is fluffy or fuzzy. So my first, lightest, and most low contrast option is this. So for like the neckline edging, the main color kind of, I would just do a plain white. This is just the Lion brand sock yarn in white. It is not my favorite fingering weight sock yarn, but it is what I have available. For the fuzzy yarn, this is kind of a one-off by a local dyer here that I've had in my stash for ages, just haven't known what to do with it. But it's Lazy Bee Yarn Company. It is their Surrey alpaca and lace yarn, and the shade is called Egret. It is a beautiful warm gray. And then for the third color, I have Moondrake Yarn Company in the color Pink Salt. So like I said, all of these are technically fingering weight. I have not tested to see how they get gauged, but I feel like all of the combinations I'm going to show you would work. This is the lightest, lowest contrast, and the one I'm leaning towards the most. I revise what I said. All of these are actually fairly low contrast, but they're in different colors. So this is certainly the lightest. The next would be the purple version. So for the main color, I have Brooklyn Tweed Pier yarn in the shade Cobbler, which is a really, really, really dark purple. Next, I have a fingering weight mohair, silk mohair, that I dyed myself. This is actually a complete yarn dye fail. I was intending for this to be blue, and it turned out purple because apparently silk takes colors super, super differently than you might expect. So the dye water was blue, this came out purple. And then the last color that I have, which would be like the kind of pop of color for this one, is Hazelnut Artisan Sock Yarn, and the color is Rave. So this would be the dark purple version. And then the last version is my least favorite. This would be the blue. So for the fuzzy, this is Alpaca Boucle yarn. It's actually discontinued. I'll put the name of the brand on the screen. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I have this for the fuzzy yarn. And then I have these two blue yarns. So the first is Heritage Silk by Cascade Yarn. The color number is 5637. This is just falling apart. I'll just retwist it. But it's a really beautiful teal blue shade. And this is actually a merino and silk blend, which I think is kind of interesting. Let's see if I can get this in here. That's a little bit better. And then I have this Shirley Bryan yarn Tumnus Tweed BFL yarn in the shade Summer Nights at the Ballpark. Summer Nights Ballpark Lights. I love like the steely blue color. I like these three colors together, but I feel like the alpaca blue boucle with the tweed with nothing. I'm not sold on this one. I like the colors together in general, but I think that the tweed in this one is making it probably a no, which leaves us either with a quite dark purple option or a quite light grayishy, pinkishy white version. The only other like thing I have in my head, I have been talking about this, I know, for like more than 6 months straight. I need a cardigan. I need to knit a cardigan. It has been on my list for absolute ages. I have spent so much time scrolling Ravelry and I just like can't quite find exactly the pattern that I want. I want quite a fitted, like not too fitted, and I know I can take like an oversized pattern and just knit a smaller size, but I don't want like a super deep armhole. I want it to be like quite fitted, and I want to have stripes, and I want it to be a raglan, and I haven't quite found the exact pattern that I'm looking for, which means I might end up making it myself. I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I have quite a lot of leftover yarn from the Farnham sweater that I knit. I think I have another sweater's quantity that I could get out of it. So I'm gonna do a little swatching, I'm gonna think on it, but I have been looking for a pattern that I could use that heavy fingering sport weight super light DK, which is the yarn that I have available, and nothing is quite hitting exactly like how I want it to look. So I might be stuck making my own pattern, but that is all fodder for next video. But I will leave you to it today. I hope you've had a good one, and I will see you next time. Bye.